This is draft season. John Schmeelk and Tony Pauline back off a week off last week with the Giants playing on Thursday night. We have a couple weeks of college football to talk about and a whole lot more. Draft season is presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. You can find all of Tony's written work at sportskeeda.com. And Tony, fun week of college football. We had an upset in the afternoon. I watched that game almost beginning to end. Then we had, of course, the Battle of Titans at night between Alabama and Georgia. And, I'm not going to lie, it's halftime of that game, and I had not gotten a lot of sleep the last couple of nights. I'm like, I was close to just putting the head down on the pillow and calling it a night. I'm happy I didn't, because that ended up being a heck of a comeback attempt by Georgia. And really, the game lived up to the billing, which is not something you can often say.
And a second upset in the SEC on the last Saturday, because Kentucky over Mississippi was an upset. I don't think too many people really thought that Alabama would beat Georgia. And just to go along with your thought about turning the TV off and going to bed, I had actually started writing my risers and sliders, and Jalen Milroe was my number one riser, and I was writing about how the hyped up game really didn't live up to the hype, and it was over before it started. And I said, you know what? Let's just wait and see what happens. And then there's this furious comeback, and wow, I mean, even if you don't like college football, which I love college football, that was just an incredible game, highlighted by two quarterbacks that are going to be top picks, in my opinion, in the NFL draft. And we saw the best and worst of each of those quarterbacks, Jalen Miller of Alabama and Carson Beck of Georgia, really throughout the game.
Yeah, and look, Tony, you hit it, and I think that's where I wanted to start. Heading into this, our last show we had a couple weeks ago, we talked about Jalen Milroe and how the flashes are there. You see the athleticism, the arm strength. At times his passes can look perfect, but there's a lack of consistency, right? Yep. Well, what do we see? We saw the all the upside of the player in the first half, and then for the next quarter and a half, you saw, all right, well, maybe he doesn't have it because now he's not looking so good. And then he makes the big throw at the end. And boy, in 2 years, when we have Jeremiah Smith and Williams from Alabama coming out in the same draft class and wide receiver, that's going to be fun. But boy, you saw the good and bad in Milroe, like his entire scout of him in one game.
After that first half, you never really rate a guy off of one game, never mind a half. But after that first half, you're like, Jalen Milroe is going to be the second or third quarterback selected. He's a top 6 pick. He's beaten Georgia. He's tearing Georgia apart with his arm and with his legs. I think he missed on 3 throws.
Yeah, I think he had almost 200 passing yards and 100 rushing yards at halftime.
Right, it was like 199 passing. I think it was 18 or 21. There was one bad interception within the when they were going in for another score, which would have put the game further out of reach, or seemingly out of reach. And then there was another incomplete where the receiver dropped the ball. So he's near perfect that first half. And like you said, I mean, the third quarter and the first half of the fourth quarter, forget about the first half, first 10 minutes of the fourth quarter, he's streaky. He can't move the offense. It's like night and day. And Alabama is down by 1 point. They got to get in the field goal range. You think they're going to work the ball down the field. And what does he do? 75-yard touchdown bomb to a freshman. So, and I think that's the thing about Milroe is the physical gifts are off the charts, and his upside is just so incredible to me. And for the most part, he makes right decisions. He makes smart decisions. He's just got to really polish his game, smooth off the rough edges. And I have a feeling that's why I have him graded so highly. As we go through the 2025 draft process, you're going to hear more and more about how scouts love this guy. They love him. He can interview well. The tape is at phenomenal points, and he makes good decisions. He protects the football.
Yeah, and Tony, you said the scouts are going to love him. He's going to interview well. I thought his post-game interview was phenomenal. Just such a mature kid, seems like a good kid, smiling, explaining the game well, just a very mature way of going about things. And you're right. Look, people are going to want to draft the upside here. And I think, their new head coach there, bringing that offensive system in large part from Washington, I think, bringing in more pro concepts to what he's asked to do. And obviously there's still a lot of college stuff there too. This is not the same offense that Michael Penix ran in Washington. It's a little bit different, but I think you're seeing him make some of these downfield throws that NFL scouts are going to, are going to be like, all right, we can see how this can translate if everything clicks.
Like Michael Penix did a year ago. I mean,
Yeah.
remember,
Mm-hmm.
the allure, the attraction to Michael Penix was his vertical passing. I mean, he was able to make throws that few other quarterbacks in the draft could make, which is one of the reasons why he went so high, much higher than everyone thought. But when you look at Milroe, compare him to Penix, doesn't have the medical history. He's a legitimate threat to beat you with his legs. I'm not a fan of design quarterback runs because you don't want to get your quarterback hurt, but they are used and they are necessary on occasion. And Jalen Milroe shows, like I said, in that first half, not only beats you with your arm, but he's deadly running the ball. I mean, and those were good Georgia athletes on that defense. It's not
And
like
he
Georgia.
just turns the corner on them again and again. It was crazy.
It's not like Georgia is a slouch on defense.
Right.
Those are not only good defensive players, they're good athletes. Those are the guys who are going to test very well. And Jalen Milroe, basically had him. They were chasing him downfield because they couldn't catch him.
No, I'm with you. You saw all the traits. And then Carson Beck. If you watch the first half of this game, you'd say, oh boy. Yeah, first down, how about third day? Like it was not pretty, Tony. It looked like to steal a line from Sam Darnold on the sideline against the Patriots, like he was seeing ghost out there. He didn't know where the defenders were going to be. He tried to throw that pass over the middle. He didn't even get it over the defender's head, threw it right to him. There were some bad decisions, like he wasn't seeing what was happening. Then in the second half, they started figuring things out, and you saw the touch. You saw the accuracy. And even in the first half, that first deep ball he threw was perfect. It was just dropped down the sideline, right? So I think you saw what you like about Carson Beck. I don't think he has an A-plus arm. I think his arm is good enough, but he's accurate. He puts the ball where it needs to go. For the most part, though, his ball placement in this game was not where you want it to be from start to finish. But he finished the game extremely strong and almost brought Georgia to a victory.
When he basically put Georgia in the hole. I mean,
Right.
that first half, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble loss, couldn't protect the football, made some bad decisions. And I kept saying, let's see how Carson Beck responds because he's never really been in a situation, or he's rarely in a situation in Georgia where he's playing from behind because Georgia is so good and so much better than their opponents. This is going to be a game where scouts key on and they have a lot of questions about because, yes, he did play incredibly well in the second half. He did bring them back and he did actually get them into the lead, but it was 30-7 at halftime. So basically, you're throwing caution to the wind because you're in such a hole. You're such a deficit, 23-point deficit, 4-score deficit. You got to, basically put the ball up. Still, there were some times where his pass placement accuracy is so on the money, and he showed a lot of cool and he showed a lot of calm. There are going to be some people who look at that second half and they praise Carson Beck. There are going to be some people who look at the interceptions and the fumbles and, the lack of great mobility as opposed to, say, Jalen Milroe, and they're going to question that.
Yeah, and look, he's functioning mobile. Like he can run, he can get yards when he needs to, but he's not the athlete that Jalen Milroe is. Absolutely. Anybody else, Tony, jump out at you during this game? I already mentioned Williams, the true freshman wide receiver from Alabama. He's going to be a player when he gets draft eligible with Jeremiah Smith in a couple of years. Smith, by the way, in the other game had another unbelievable catch for a touchdown this week. That kid's unbelievable. The Georgia wide receivers didn't necessarily impress me all that much. We didn't see a ton from Trevor Etienne because they were playing from behind pretty much the entire game, so they couldn't use him much, though there were a couple runs still where he showed some change in direction and some vision that I thought was pretty awesome. Anyone else jump out at you during this game?
Especially late in the game. And I hate to point to defense, but I thought Deontay Lawson, the linebacker for Alabama, he's a terrific player. He's explosive. He's what we're accustomed to at Alabama. These incredibly athletic sideline to sideline, middle defenders, linebackers who are also very good at blitzing the quarterback. Keep an eye on Deontay Lawson, number 0.
Good stuff, Tony. Now, I want to get to the other upset that we mentioned. Ole Miss falling in that game to Kentucky. Now, maybe this should have been that big of a surprise. We saw how Kentucky played Georgia, right?
Yep.
Was that either last week or 2 weeks ago, where they had them down to a final possession. Georgia had the ball with a chance to win that game against Georgia. And then this week, Ole Miss, we talked about Jackson Dart when we did our offensive rankings last week, and I think you saw when the defense shut down some of the easy answers in that offensive system that is so effective down there, that things did not come so easily. And just a really good job by that Kentucky defense, which we also talked about a couple weeks ago when they had that game against Georgia.
They are a stout, tough, punch in the face defense. Like you said, they shut down Georgia until late in the game. And what happens with Kentucky is their defense is so far ahead of their offense, and oftentimes their offense can't move the ball. If
Right.
you watch that Georgia game, even if you watch the Mississippi game, they're coming out late in the game, late third quarter, fourth quarter, and they're gassed because they're big guys and they're gassed, and their offense couldn't get anything, especially the Georgia game, sustained to give them a break. They finally did against Mississippi late. Deontay Walker, the big defensive tackle. He's not
Dion Walker.
Deion Walker. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Deion Walker, the big defensive tackle. He's not just a gap occupier. I mean, he's a
No.
relatively athletic, mobile guy who is a decent pass rusher, who moves relatively well. Keyshawn Silver, the transfer from North Carolina, number 9, has really stepped it up. Jamon Dumas Johnson, the athletic outside linebacker who, for some reason, transferred to Kentucky from Georgia. I'm sure he got a huge NIL package, but he's incredibly athletic. He's forceful. And Tyreek Jackson, a guy who really doesn't get a lot of mention. He's more of a two-down, tough, run-defending linebacker who I think is going to go late in the draft, but he's really good at what he does.
Yeah, and just a really nice job. And do you give a hit to that Ole Miss offense? Jackson Dark, Harris, right, is their number one wide receiver, or do those guys kind of stay where they are for you, Tony, when you evaluate those guys?
I think it's a hit for the Mississippi offense. I thought the offensive line, especially the right side, didn't do a very good job. And I think the Mississippi coaches also have to take a hit, especially when you consider that game was played in Oxford. That was a
Yeah.
home game for Mississippi, and Kentucky goes in there and beats them.
Absolutely, I'm with you. Friday night, I believe, right, was the Miami Virginia Tech game, another close game, and Cam Ward, he had some ups and downs, man. Like the game was a bit of a roller coaster for him, but in the end, another very productive game, and he figured out a way to get Miami the win.
Wild game where Miami was up early. Virginia Tech came back. Miami came back, and then there was that last play. It looked like a touchdown, but they called it back. Cam Ward, 24-38, 343 yards, 4 TDs, but 2 interceptions, one which was a pick six. And I think sort of like Jalen Milroe and Carson Beck in that Alabama-Georgia game, if you watch the Miami-Virginia Tech game, you saw the best and the worst of Cam Ward. He's cool. He's always in control of the situation. For the most part, he makes good decisions, but there's a lot of poor mechanics when he throws the football. A lot of throwing across his body, which leads to interceptions. A lot, sometimes late passes, because he's trying to make plays, but he's delivering the ball late. And the thing with Virginia Tech is, I mean, they've got 2 terrific cornerbacks that are going to be day 2 picks, Mansour Delane, the junior, and Dorian Strong. And when you're throwing across your body, or you're throwing the ball late and you're going up against good defensive backs, they're going to make you pay. And that's what happened against Virginia Tech.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump over to the Boise State running back. We talked about a little bit a couple weeks ago, Tony, and thanks to a score update during that Ole Miss game, Giante, so we have that now. Assuming ABC has it correct. Ashton Giante, just an unbelievable game versus Washington State. 26 carries, 259 yards, 4 touchdowns at 192 yards against Oregon the previous week. And for those of people my age and probably a little younger than you, Tony, used to use Bo Jackson in Tecmo Bowl, and people used to just bounce off of him, and you can run around and do crazy stuff, and nobody could tackle Bo Jackson or Christian Okoye, for that matter, in Tecmo Bowl. That's what it's like watching Ashton Giante. It looks like this guy like lathers himself in like butter before the game, as people just slide off of him. They bounce off of him. They just cannot bring this guy to the ground. He's unbelievable.
From a college football point of view, you got to say he's the Heisman Trophy favorite right now after the first month of the season.
More so than Travis Hunter, you think, huh?
Yes, because I think he's done it against a little bit better competition. It'll be interesting to see with Travis Hunter, because I think Giante means more to Boise State than Hunter does to Colorado. And a lot of people will probably say, what are you talking about, Tony? Well, you still got Shedeur Sanders there and a few other playmakers. But I think Giante is should be the favorite, whether it's, all the headlines and the hype, whether he gets it or not. But you look at his numbers. You mentioned the game against Oregon. He had that great first game against Georgia Southern. From a pro prospect point of view, it's sort of like Brees Hall in the sense that, he's a first round talent who plays a second round position. But the way things are going now, if he has a good postseason, which I'm sure, he should have a good postseason, you look at his game, he's not just a downhill ball carrier. He can turn the corner, he can get around the edge. They don't throw him the ball that much, but when they do, he does a good job catching it. I could see him going late first round. I could see a team moving back into the first round to grab him because he is a 3 down back that can fit a variety of schemes.
Yeah, this is going to be a much better running back draft class than we've had, I think, the last year or so. So that'll be fun to look at. Tony, anything else you want to hit before we get to your defensive top tens here?
No, I mean, that was basically it from last week. There was a lot of exciting games, and I think, there were games that could impact the NFL draft from the guys that we just spoke about.
All right, let's get to our defensive top tens, Tony. You ever broke it down into defensive tackles, defensive ends, linebackers, and then you have defensive back. So that's how we're going to have this split up here for everybody. Tony differentiated between the D ends and the outside linebackers, so we'll go through that as well. But let's first start with the defensive tackles, Tony, and not a surprise, the three guys who you have on top of your board here, but I will have a question for you as to one of their rankings for you. You have Deion Walker, who you just mentioned from Kentucky, a 340-pound guy that can move like a 305-pound guy, which is really impressive. And then the two Michigan guys, Kenneth Grant, who you also have a first-round grade on out of Michigan, but you have a second-round grade on Mason Graham, which I think, based on what I've seen and what I know some other analysts say, they're probably surprised to see that there. So talk about those three as a group, and then why you have Graham as the third guy in that group with a second-round grade.
I have a very early second round grade on him. If you look at, even though my grading system, I got a 3.99, which is a fringe first round grade. Why do I have him listed lower than Kenneth Grant? Because Kenneth Grant is a lot like Deion Walker, except he's probably more mobile. He's more athletic. He makes a lot more plays outside the box, and he's a big, huge guy. I like Graham a lot. I don't know how he's going to test athletically. I think he may be a bit more limited. I know he's a little bit more limited than Kenneth Grant. That's why I have a early second round grade. But again, he plays the defensive tackle position, so it would not be a surprise if he ends up in the first round because that is a priority position come draft weekend.
No question about it. I think Walker is going to be, when all said and done, Tony, we're going to look at it, he's going to be one of the safer picks in the draft. Like, if you pick that guy, you know you're going to get a good NFL player. We'll see how good he's going to be. But at that size and athleticism, and similar probably for Grant, though he's not quite as big as Walker, right? I don't think he's upwards of 340, 350. But,
no,
Walker, I think, is going to be one of the safer picks in this draft, wherever he ends up going.
And he's playing like it now. I mean, we spoke about it in the Mississippi game. You go back and you watch the Georgia game. He clogs the middle of the field, but he also does a nice job making plays. He's not a 2-down defensive tackle. He's a guy that can play 3 downs, which is a major bonus. Now, you don't want these guys to be huge. They can't be 360. So in the lead up to the draft, he's going to have to show that he's in good condition and he's going to have to test well. I'm sure that the latter will come true. The conditioning, that will come down to, his interviews, and more importantly, what the Kentucky coaches say about him off the field.
Yeah, a couple years ago, we talked about Jordan Davis and how he tested as a super athletic defensive tackle, but that didn't necessarily show up on tape, Tony, the way it does for him. And it's funny.
Yeah, it
correct.
For Jordan Davis on a consistent basis, where Walker has been, very consistent.
And this will be somewhat of an aside, so I apologize, but I was thinking about this yesterday as Travis Jones tracked down Josh Allen on the sideline on that pass last night on Sunday Night Football. I remember 2 years ago, I thought I wasn't necessarily sold that I liked Jordan Davis more than Travis Jones. They were in the same draft, and I feel pretty good about that right now. I'm not going to lie.
Travis Jones, the light has gone on for him this year. I wrote about him at Sports Ski in the preseason about what kind of a camp he was having and how he was basically taking over that starting position. And he's a good fit because he's a good athlete, and it's clicking for him this year.
Yeah,
coming absolutely out of UConn.
Yeah, I know. And that was the thing out of UConn, right? You saw flashes of dominance, but it wasn't that consistency down in, down out when he came out that year. All right, let's go to your next group. You have four other guys, Tony, with second round grades. About time. We haven't had a good defensive tackle draft in a while, so the NFL needs this desperately, by the way. You have Walter Nolan out of Mississippi, Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. We've talked about him before. TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, and then Bear Alexander out of USC, a better named defensive tackle. I'm not sure we're going to have.
Alexander's more of your one gap, three technique type, not the biggest guy in the world, not the tallest guy in the world, but extremely quick, explosive, plays with great leverage, and gets that first step on defenders. A lot of people are up and down on TJ Sanders. TJ Sanders is a guy, when he's on his game, he will just take over the game. Watch last year's film against Georgia when he was unstoppable against what was a terrific Georgia offensive line, including the center of Cedric Van, whatever his last name was.
Ben Pratt, right? Ben Pratt.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He's a guy, he's athletic and he's got terrific size. Tyleik Williams, you mentioned Deion Walker being a very safe pick. I think it's the same thing with Tyleik Williams. He comes out, he plays 3 downs, he goes hard every snap. Not the biggest playmaker in the world, not the most athletic guy in the world, but very consistent. Walter Nolan is a big athletic guy. You saw flashes of him Saturday against Kentucky. You saw flashes last year when he was at Texas A&M. I have a second round grade on him. He's right under Mason Graham. But again, the guy who's that big, who plays a priority position like defensive tackle, if he takes off and then tests well in the lead up to the draft, wouldn't surprise me if he ends up in the back end of round 1.
Anyone else from this list, Tony, that you want to point out? I'll just point out Nazir Stackhouse that you have in the 4th round. I think, again, he's just a big body. He's a space eater. He's a guy that I think is a pretty safe pick, either late day 2, early day 3. Anyone else from this list jump out of you? Stackhouse is for Georgia, by the way.
And Stackhouse had a good game. Had some flashes against Alabama. He's up and down, though. Keep an eye on Yahya Black of Iowa, 6'5.5", 333 pounds. He's going to test relatively well. He's a guy that has shown flashes of ability literally the past 2 years. I want to see him put it all together. I will be at that Ohio State game, so let's see how he does against what is a good developing Ohio State offensive line. But Yahya Black, you want to talk about great names? He's got a lot of upside. Scouts like him. Came into the season with 4th round grades. He's moved into the second day, has the ability to move up even further.
From Yaya Diaby 2 seasons ago to Yaya Block this year. Who knew? A lot of Yayas. Ay. All right, let's go to the defensive ends here, Tony. We got only one guy with a true 1st round grade, and that's James Pierce. No surprise. You have a 1/2 on JT Tuimalu from Ohio State. He obviously could have came out last year. Probably would have been drafted in the same area, I would imagine. Maybe early 2nd round for him. Then you have Jordan Burch, another player that we thought might come out last year. He did not. He stayed in the draft. Ashton Gillott, another guy we talked about on last year's shows that we thought might come out. He's kind of like a tweener a little bit between D tackle and D end. Then you have Sex Shamar Turner, Michael Williams from Georgia, and Landon Jackson, all with 2nd round grades as well.
James Pierce, I have him as a DN. You could just as easily put him as an outside linebacker. Not having the great knockout season that everybody thought. I mean, coming into after the 2024 draft, coming in the season, people thought that Pierce, sort of an undersized, explosive edge rusher, could be a top 5 pick. Really hasn't enforced his will this year and has been very inconsistent, but he's athletic and he gets a lot of force up the field. Tuimalu is a guy who shows tremendous flashes. He's athletic. He's not just an edge rusher. He can get out into space and pursue the action and make plays out to the flanks. He's good. He's not great, but he does things very well. I think would be very good in the 4-man line. Jordan Burch is a guy, he's a bit of an enigma. You keep waiting for Jordan Burch to take off, and he shows flashes of dominance. 6'4.5", 294 pounds. He's probably going to run in the low 4.8s. He can stand over tackle. He can come out of a 3-point stance. But he's got to start to play to those numbers on a snap-in, snap-out basis. He's really got to show, that he can be a number 1 guy. Ashton Gillett, I agree with you. I haven't graded higher than most as an early 2nd round pick. 6'2.5", 275. Is he a defensive end? Is he a defensive tackle? Is he a 3 technique guy? You line him up inside. The guy just makes plays after play after play behind the line of scrimmage. He's a disruptive force. Shamar Turner is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated players at the position. 6'3", 290 pounds, 4.77, very athletic. He plays to those numbers. He makes a lot of plays up the field as a pass rusher or can get out into space. Michael Williams, when he's on his game, he's tough to stop, struggling with injuries thus far this year. Landon Jackson is a taller, stronger guy from Arkansas. Some people have him as a first-round pick. I disagree. I don't think he's going to be a great tester, but he's a real good football player.
And one other guy I'll throw out from the list, Tony, you have him in the third round with Nick Scorton out of Texas A&M, Purdue transfer. I just like his combination of size of athleticism. He's got a wicked spin move. I know he hasn't taken off quite yet this year. He had a minor ankle injury, I believe, in week 1, if I recall. I don't know if he missed any time with that, but I think Scorton, when all is said and done, might move up some boards from where you have him.
Bigger guy, moves very well. And the guy that I have underneath him, Michael Green from Marshall. Keep an eye on him. I think he's got 4 or 5 sacks already. He's a taller, thin edge rusher. He's got to just physically mature, but Marshall, for years, they had guys going in the first round. It's kind of fallen off. They have guys drafted here and there. I think Michael Green is a guy from Marshall who's going to be at least a day 2 pick, depending on how long he stays in, how he continues to develop his game and his body.
All right, from defensive end to outside linebacker, this is where kind of your edgy, twitchy guys that you have on the board that Tony likes to put them in this category. So you have a couple guys that people should be familiar with based on our conversations here already, Tony. Abdul Carter, who is the next guy in the Chop Robinson, Dafe Owe, Micah Parsons kind of group from Penn State. All very similar. He was an inside backer last year. Now he's on the edge for them. Jalen Walker from Georgia, who's had a really big start to this year. You have a second-round grade on him. Barrett Carter out of Clemson, and then 2 other second-round grades. Then we'll go through the rest of the group. Trey Moore and Jamin Dumas Johnson out of Kentucky, who you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Abdul Carter, you watched the game against Illinois, didn't have a lot of stats early in the game, but he was imposing his will. I mean, he was beating the defensive tackle around the edge to the inside, making the quarterback, Altmaier, move his feet, leave the pocket. Illinois, who's had a really good year, has had a really good season, as is Altmaier, their quarterback. And I just think with Carter, I think I said this in the beginning of the year, people are going to pigeonhole him or broad brush him as a edge rusher, but I think he's a lot more than that. I mean, I think he's a guy that can play 3 downs. He's great. He was terrific in space last year. They're using him more up at the line of scrimmage. And that versatility, that ability to do so many things well, in my opinion, is going to push him into the very early part of the draft. And he looks like a guy that's going to test incredibly well. Ditto for Jalen Walker, guy that I've mentioned a couple times on this podcast. I watched the Georgia tape, and I kept seeing this guy who was a substitute player, was a role player, wasn't a starter last year, number 11, the athleticism, making plays, and Jalen Walker has really taken his game to the next level. As a blitzer, as someone who can make plays in space. Guy sort of reminds me of Nolan Smith in that capacity. He's got a great amount of upside. Barrett Carter, I mean, he's your traditional weak side linebacker. Doesn't do a bad job on the blitz, but he's a guy that you're going to use him in coverage. You're going to use him to go sideline and sideline. I have him as an outside linebacker. Sometimes they put these guys on the inside. They use them as inside linebackers because they can run so quickly sideline to sideline. Carter's a guy who's going to barely measure 6 foot tall, 230, 235 pounds, probably going to run the 4.55s. Sort of like that type of linebacker that people have forgotten about. How running backs have been downgraded. Your off-the-ball linebackers have also been downgraded, but Carter is one of the best ones in this draft. Trey Moore, a lot of people don't know about him, was at Texas San Antonio last year. He showed flashes. I'm told that the Texas coaches love him. He's got great upside. He is more of your Abdul Carter type, a real good pass rusher who also has the ability to play in space. Jamin Dumas Johnson, we talked about him earlier. And then Derek Moore out of Michigan, who's having a good year for, a Wolverine team that is a little bit down, especially compared to last year when he won the national championship because they lost so much talent on the offensive side of the ball. But Derek Moore is also, your big, stout, 3-down linebacker. I have him as an outside linebacker, but again, you could stick him on the inside as well.
Anybody else in this group, Tony, that you want to touch on?
Cullen Oliver is a guy from Oklahoma State, scouts like, but he got injured early on. Power Eccles of North Carolina has shown flashes. Just a great athlete. I mean, he's Going to be under. He's going to measure about 6 foot tall, maybe a shade less, 230 pounds, but he's going to run in the low 4.4s, and he plays to that speed.
And then you have one guy I'll ask you about. You have Jack Sawyer all the way in the 4th round here, which I think some Ohio State fans might be upset about.
6'4.5", 263 pounds, is probably going to run in the 4.8s. I mean, he's a good college pass rusher. Is he a defensive end on Sunday? Is he an outside lineman? I think he's a situational pass rusher on Sunday, unless he, surprises people with his pre-draft testing. And as such, I think that's why I have his draft stock a little bit further down.
All right, let's go to the inside linebackers here, Tony. And the only guy with the first-round grade you have is Harold Perkins out of LSU, who unfortunately now is dealing with a serious injury.
And a lot of people thought he was an edge rusher. I go back to his early days at LSU, where he was like a heat-seeking missile, going sideline to sideline, would find the ball handler, was basically a knockout hitter, covers a lot of area on the field. People are talking about him as a edge rusher, but he's only about 6'2", 220 pounds, and now he's dealing with an injury, unfortunately.
Absolutely. You have 3 guys with second-round grades: Danny Stutzman, Nick Martin, and Lander Barton.
Stutzman is a guy that NFL scouts love. I mean, we'll talk about this in a little while, but Stutzman came into the year with basically some of the higher grades from the senior class, first-round grades. He's tough. He's smart. He's relatively athletic. He's very explosive, good against the pass, can play the run. But again, he's more of that. He's not the Abdul Carter pass rusher. He's more of your traditional 3-down linebacker and defending the run and covering the pass, which is why I have a second-round grade on him. But you never know. I mean, you saw Jack Campbell, right, of Iowa go in the first round a couple of years ago. He's that similar type of player.
All right, let's go to the defensive backs.
Let me just have one other guy.
Go ahead.
Nick Martin of Oklahoma State. Coming into the year, Colin Oliver, his teammate, got high grades from scouts. Oliver was injured. And then Nick Martin has just taken over at Oklahoma State's defense when they play defense. Even when they don't, you can see Oliver number 4, see Martin number 4 just roaming the field. I mean, the guy is incredibly athletic. He's very fast in every direction of the field. Not a bad blitzer, but great in space.
All right, let's go to the defensive backs, Tony. And cornerbacks dominate this in terms of first-round grades. Though, I'm going to ask you about the one safety that you have in the second round. Actually, you have 2 or 3 of them. But the top one is Malachi Starks. A lot of people have him as a first-round pick. What's holding you back from giving him a first-round grade, Tony?
Could be. I mean, I could understand that. It's just that, and he's not bad in coverage. And I look at these guys, are they a liability when they play over the slot receiver? And the issue is no for Malachi Starks. Underclassmen want to see how he tests. And I hate to say this, it's kind of a blight on me, but the safeties kind of downgraded as not as a priority position or a first-round position. I could understand why people would put a first-round grade on him, though.
All right, you have a couple other safeties with second-round picks. Why don't we knock that position out first? You have Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma, Rod Moore out of Michigan, Tony, and then you have a couple third-round grades with Dante Trader, Nick Imawari, and Malik Verdon.
And Mawari is a guy that we spoke about with Bruce Feldman in our first show. Bowman, he's a complete safety, terrific run defender, good covering center field, excellent against the pass. Rod Moore is that similar type of safety, has struggled with some injuries, just hasn't put it together. And Mawari looks more like a linebacker in the secondary, the way he plays. He's so large and he's so imposing. And even the guy I have under Emirati, Verdon, is like Emirati in that he looks like a big linebacker, playmaking linebacker in the secondary.
All right, let's go to the cornerback position, Tony. And 2 guys and we're going to hit this as our last point today about consensus first-round picks, but 2 guys that I feel like are fairly consensus for the first round is Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame and Will Johnson out of Michigan, though I think, unlike most people, you have Morrison ahead of Johnson right now.
Right, because I think Morrison does a better job making plays with his back to the ball. Johnson doesn't do a bad job of it. I think with Johnson, teams just don't throw in his direction. But I like Morrison's ability to make plays with his back to the ball. I also like his size, speed numbers. I don't think you can go wrong with either guy.
Absolutely. And then you have Denzel Burke and Takario Davis with kind of fringe first, early second-round grades. And then you have a bunch of second-round grades here, Tony. You got Davison Igbinson from Ohio State. I probably butchered that. I apologize. Siobhan Revel, we've talked about him out of East Carolina. Mansour Delane, we just mentioned him earlier out of Virginia Tech, and Jade Barron out of Texas. A lot of guys that you like there with second-round grades at DB.
Yeah, Barron is more of your nickel back. I don't think he's a starting cornerback. Ravel from East Carolina suffered an ACL injury in practice about a week and a half ago, so he's done for the year. I mean, he is your prototypical 6'2", 190 pounds, runs in the 4.3s. He's more of a size speed guy. He's a good cornerback, but he needed a lot of work on his ball skills. Where I said Benjamin Morrison does a great job making plays with his ball, Ravel does a lot of face guarding. I don't. It doesn't matter as of right now because he's not playing the rest of the season. I'm sure he'll go through the process and decide whether or not he's going to enter the draft. Some people thought he could be a first round pick. I don't know. I mean, it's there's the Seattle Seahawks that usually draft those bigger, fast cornerbacks, regardless of the ball skills, very early. The two Ohio State kids I absolutely love. Ibison, who is the a third year junior, 6'1.5", 290 pounds, 190 pounds, 190 pounds at corner, and he's showing developing more ball skills. Denzel Burke, not as athletic, but very consistent. Struggled a little bit last year, made the right decision, come back in 2024, and I think he's got starting ability on Sunday.
All right, final thing for you, Tony, unless there's someone else in the DBs you want to mention that we didn't get to.
No, that's about it.
Okay. Jim Nagy sent out a tweet this morning. We're recording this on Monday. It'll be airing on Tuesday. So I'll just read the tweet. Spoke to 4 NFL execs this past week, and all said the same thing about the upcoming 2025 draft. There's and this is bold, his emphasis, not mine, unusually small number of surefire first rounders this year. Amount of round 1 grades in most drafts is in mid-teens, and good drafts tend to have low 20s. Based on these conversations I'm having, there's less than 10 consensus first rounders right now at this point of the fall scouting process. Dane Brugler replied to that. He says basically from what he's talking to, he's getting the same feedback from people. Tony, are you getting the same?
Yes and no. I mean, there's got to be some context here. Are we just talking about seniors? Are we talking about all, all players, including juniors? So I don't know what the context was. Now, a couple of things. You've mentioned in the past about how conservative I am on my grades.
Yep.
Especially with quarterbacks. If you talk to scouts, especially this early in the process, they're even more conservative. I mean, they are crazy conservatives. Let's break it down. The only underclassman quarterback that got a first round grade coming into the season by scouts was Shedeur Sanders. Quinn Ewers was graded as a third round pick by scouts coming into the season, and a lot of people think he's a top 10 pick. I don't, but a lot of people say top 10. He was given a third round grade. Carson Strong was graded as a day 2 pick coming into the season. Whether they've moved that with the Miami quarterback, Cam Ward was basically given a 4th round grade coming into the season. So the other thing, they're not adjusting their draft boards on a week by week basis, these teams, because you have the area scouts and the area scouts get together and then they adjust their boards. So they'll have meetings towards the end of the regular college season, and I think we'll see that number move up. I can understand it, especially with the quarterbacks, because you have all these people, Drew Allar. I mean, I guarantee you no scouts have a first round grade on Drew Allar. I love Jalen Milrose. I think he's going to be an early pick. But I think if you talk to 100 scouts, 99 scouts would not have a first round pick on Jalen Milroe. That's the way it's done, especially this early in the season.
Yeah, and something else, Dane Brugler, who we're going to try to have on the show next few weeks. We're going to start rolling in some guests here as we get deeper into the college season, Tony. But, he kind of said he doesn't think that they're right now, consensus-wise, as a lock top 10 quarterback. Would you consider right now that there's consensus on a lock top 10 quarterback, or are people all over the place on Sanders and Beck and, Ewers and all these other guys?
Okay. I'm looking at my board now. The only top 10 quarterback I have is Shedeur Sanders, and he hasn't played all that well this year. A couple of reasons, because he doesn't have a great offensive line, but go back to what I said with Cam Ward about the poor fundamentals, throwing the ball across his body, the releasing passes late. That is what Shedeur Sanders does times 2. I mean, he's constantly throwing across his body. He doesn't throw with proper footwork, and that's going to downgrade him. And remember, Shedeur Sanders came into the season graded by some scouts as a top 10 pick. I don't know that people feel that his game is taken next level. It's kind of even leveled off. And from a fundamental point of view, it may have regressed. The only top 10 grade I have on a quarterback right now would be Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, and you know what? They asked Mel Kiper when he comes on ESPN all these questions about these top guys, and I'm just scrolling through his top 10 right now, and he doesn't have any quarterbacks in his top 10. I'm trying to find where his first quarterback pops in, and it's Shedeur Sanders at 12. So it sounds like all you guys are kind of, he is Beck at 13 and yours in 14 and Ward at 15. So I think he's playing it safe having those four guys all next to each other. Which one of these guys, Tony, do you think has the biggest stretch of grades from scouts, where some guy might have him top 10, other guy might have him like in round 4?
Cam Ward, no doubt about it. I mean, because like I said, people looking at the past couple of weeks, they look at the Florida game, how incredible he was. They look at the game against Virginia Tech. I've seen mock drafts. I just checking that some out this morning. They have Cam Ward as a top 5 pick. I guarantee you, if you talk to a lot of people, scouts in the business, they're going to say, yeah, bottom half of second round. The other guy would be Quinn Ewers. Like I said, I mean, people think top 10. Quinn Ewers came into the season with third round grades, and now he's injured, and Arch Manning has taken over, the job and the headlines at the University of Texas. I think they got to go back to Quinn Ewers, but that's not going to help Quinn Ewers, who, while some people think he's a top 10 pick, scouts are saying day 2.
That's interesting. And I should point out to people too, obviously, this is a draft podcast, it's not a Giant podcast per se, but a lot of Giant fans obviously are listening to this based on that, hosted on giants.com, our podcast platforms, everything like that. So I'll just say this very briefly, Tony, that a lot of Giant fans are like, oh, just wait for Arch Manning. Guys, like the Manning family has said this, like they want him there 4 years. So unless you want to wait like 3 seasons, I wouldn't hold your breath here, guys. Like Arch Manning is going to be there for a while. I think the Mannings realize, Tony, and rightfully so, if you look at some of the success these quarterbacks have had the last couple of years, is the quarterbacks that have played a lot in college that have had the fastest success in the NFL. Go back to Joe Burrow, who was in college. I know he didn't start a lot of games early in his career, but he was in college for a long time. He was an older prospect, right? Jaden Daniels was there for a long time playing. So a lot of these guys that have been there for a longer period of time end up having the most success right away.
As did Peyton Manning. I mean, because if you remember, I mean, they all have to look as their own family. Everyone thought that Peyton Manning was going to come out or everyone believed Peyton Manning was going to come out as a junior. The New York Jets held the top pick of the 1997 draft. Bill Parcells had just taken over the New York Jets. It made complete sense. And what happens? He goes back to school because he wants to try and win the Heisman Trophy. He wants to beat Florida. He wants to play in the SEC championship game. None of that worked out. But that was probably, part and parcel to Peyton Manning being such a terrific college pro quarterback, although he wouldn't have been probably anyway. But still, I'm sure it helped him. The fact that, he went back for that extra year. And don't forget, Peyton Manning, Ryan Leaf were in the same draft. There were some people who liked Ryan Leaf more than Peyton Manning because he had the better arm. He was bigger. He was more the vertical passer. Wasn't even a contest. And I guarantee you, if you talk to Archie Manning, you talk to Peyton, they'll say, staying that extra year really helped me, really improve my game.
All right, Tony, good stuff, my friend. Always good to talk to you.
Absolutely, John.
Tony Pauline, sportskeeda.com. Draft season is brought to you by Moody's, a proud partner of the Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risk into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. For Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda, I am John Schmeelk. Thanks for joining us on draft season. We'll see you next week, everybody.